The standard of living in Canada is dropping fast. TD and Scotiabank are also saying that it's dropping and it's not going to stop declining anytime soon. So let's get into this, see what's going on. The permanent decline of Canadian living standards, not good at all. Canada's standard of living is in decline, has been declining for years, and isn't poised to stop declining for at least a generation. At least that's the verdict of a host of recent economic reports, finding that if current conditions continue, Canada's future is one in which its citizens just get a little poorer with each passing year. And, you know, they don't even know the half of that, right? I'm going to show you on this chart, which I created. It's not the best chart, but it kind of illustrates my point here of what's been going on. This is real inflation-adjusted wages. You'd be hard-pressed to find a chart of just inflation-adjusted wages in Canada because they don't want you to know that. But this is adjusted for the 1980s base CPI. So this is when it was a fixed basket before they stopped meddling with it every year and changing what goes into it and what comes out of it. So it's really interesting to take a look at this. And you can see here that for the past 27 years, you have essentially seen real wage growth, which is the yellow line here, has never got really above 0%. Just positive growth. In fact, it's only happened once in 2008 right here. This was around 2008, 2009. And then you can see again right here. When was that? That was in 2020 during the massive stimulus programs which the government did, which was largely artificial because it wasn't that people's incomes went up massively. It was just the fact that they weren't paying all their bills. They weren't paying their mortgage. I mean, we had like, what was it? 20-30% of people were just deferring their mortgage payments in Canada during 2020 and 2021. Do any of you guys remember that? But this really shows just the extreme nature of where inflation's been. And I don't even think this is enough. You know, I just doubled the CPI to essentially get to the 1980 CPI because that's pretty much what you have to do if you use shadow stats metrics. And you can see here that it peaked out at 16.3% inflation last year. But do you even think that's accurate? Do you honestly believe that's accurate? I would say it was above 20%. And inflation is highly personal, so it's hard to get a number that is very precise for each individual. Some people don't commute in the car, other people are using public transit, and you can see how things affect everybody's inflation scores different. If you look at this and kind of just have a baseline level, 16%, it still seems on the low side when you look at producer prices and input costs and how much they rose. So, you know, it's pretty obvious that you can see here that real wages, they declined minus 12%, which I didn't see this reported anywhere, guys, which as far as the data goes back is the biggest decline in real wage growth we've ever seen in Canada. So you're talking about people are losing money on their wages. That's the reality of what's happening here. So this is a massive crisis, and the National Post and Scotiabank and TD that are commenting on it, they don't even realize the half of this because their real wage growth numbers are coming out using the government's phony CPI numbers. So let's continue on here and see what they say. Despite turning in solid headline growth in recent years, Canada has lagged behind the US and other advanced economies in terms of the standard of living performance, declared a new report by TD Bank. It adds, unfortunately for Canadians, little turnaround in Canadian living standards appears to be on the horizon. Last month, an analyst released by the Business Council of British Columbia found that Canada was one of the few advanced countries whose citizens have a lower standard of living than they did before the pandemic. So that's really interesting. So all those things the government didn't work. As of the most recent figures recorded by the World Bank, Canada's per capita GDP stood at around 72,000. It's still higher than every other country in the G7 except the United States. But what's worrying economists is that has come to a near standstill, even as every other advanced economy is seeing its citizens get richer. As TD noted, since 2015, Canadian real GDP per capita has grown by a meager 0.5% annually, paling in comparison to the advanced economy average of 1.4%. So it just goes to show that the shared prosperity in this nation is going down. And the economy, it really isn't grown by as much as you would think it actually is. And you know what's really interesting? I'll show you the chart of GDP per capita so you can see it. But you can see it is kind of flat right now. We haven't really seen any massive growth. And you know what's really interesting, if you drill down to a province like Alberta, for instance, it looks even more dreadful. I mean, Alberta's GDP per capita as of 2022 last year, it's still low, way lower. It hasn't even passed this 2014 high and isn't close to it. So, you know, GDP per capita has rose, but it's nowhere near where it was in 2014 during the oil boom or before the 2008 financial crisis even. So that just goes to show you that what you're being told about different places is complete utter bullshit. And you have to be very careful when listening to these politicians, because they're going to tell you, yeah, everything is going great, everything's fine. But the reality is it's not so great. So, you know, this is really the big problem here. The fact that when you have real wage growth that is this negative, that has a massive impact on people's purchasing power. And, you know, this is going to cause a big problem, which you're going to see evident in the economy in the future. It will, and it has to. It has to work its way out, and it will. So you cannot hide minus 12% growth in wages. You just can't. So anyway, another thing, newcomers to Canada not driving employment gains is Scotiabank is complaining. So this is another interesting article, Canada's expansive immigration policy, which has seen an influx of over 1.5 million newcomers to the country in the last 12 months alone, has been predicated on the assumption that large volumes of newcomers is necessary to support an aging demographic and address labor shortages. So quickly on the labor shortages, you know, have we seen any of those labor shortages alleviated by all these people that have come in? No, because it's a complete bullshit as usual. It's just, I don't know what it is. All these targets just seem absolutely bizarre. Like, you shouldn't even be targeting numbers to come to your country. That shouldn't be happening. It should be a free market process. And when you start to get targets like that, of course, if you're not getting near to meeting your targets, as a politician, you're going to want to meet those targets. So what you're going to do, you're going to allow people who are less and less skilled into your country, more refugees, in order to fill those targets that you have. It's not the fact that Canada cares about refugees or anything like that. It doesn't care about them at all. They're all on the streets in different cities across Canada. So that just goes to show you, it's literally because you have Trudeau, who is just trying to fulfill his targets, which just seems absolutely bizarre. So a recent research from banks, including BMO, TD, has increasingly indicated that the influx of new Canadian residents has had more negative than positive consequences, including the exacerbation of a housing shortage, a worsening weaknesses in Canada's already strained infrastructure, such as healthcare. And we all know that is definitely the case as well. I mean, the impact that it will have on housing is just inevitable. I don't think that directly impacts the housing market right now, but it's going to impact rental accommodation. And even if they're taking up lots of hotel spaces and things like that, that drives up the cost for hotel rooms. If they're going into Airbnbs, apartments, different places like that, it's just going to make it's just going to mean terrible things when it comes to housing supply, which already is at record lows because you've got landlords that are selling right now. They don't want to rent out their houses. They've seen their mortgage go up and it's skyrocketed. I mean, it was always a case that people's rent wasn't covering the mortgage and all the expenses, but now it's just got to such an extreme that landlords are bailing. And whilst that's all happening and you've got the pressures on the housing market forming this housing crisis, you've then got massive amounts of immigration coming in, which just is completely ridiculous. I mean, it is a disastrous policy and heading right before a recession as well. Just think about where this ends. A new report from Scotiabank, the narrative that immigration is driving jobs and GDP is more hype based on spurious correlations than substance, implying that the Canadian immigration experiment is not just worsening the housing crisis and straining Canadian infrastructure, it is also failing to deliver the benefits of the premise this policy has been primarily predicated on, which is move to a better country, have a better lifestyle, or reap the economic benefits of Canada. How's that the case? If you come here, you can't find a place to live, you're forced to live on the streets, you can't find a job. I mean, in what world does that make any sense? But here we are in Canada. And meanwhile, whilst this is happening, GTA new condo sales see the slowest first half of the year since 2013. So it's really, really interesting. You've got Canadian condo sales that are down massively. So it's 59% below the sales seen in the same period during 2022. This year's first half is 42% below the first half 10-year average of 11,516 units sold, and that's 6,727 right now. So you're really seeing the pressure on the housing market become apparent, and people are worried, and people are starting to lose their jobs, and the recession fear, it's going to come back in towards the end of the year, at least in my opinion, because more and more people are going to begin to lose their job, and word is going to spread of what's happening, and people are going to see it, and it's just not a good sign of what's coming. And if you look at the real residential property price index for Canada, this does not show you a chart that is in any way coupled to population growth. I know that people like to think, oh yeah, it's all about population growth. They like to pin the housing market to immigration, to population growth. But really, the chart has no correlation to population growth or immigration, as you can see on this chart right now. And, if you look in the past, like during the 1970s, when immigration was really, really strong, in fact, stronger than it is right now, real residential property prices were largely flat, and we were actually building less homes back then. We were actually building less homes per person back then. So it just goes to show you how crazy the narrative can kind of get driven to the forefront in the mainstream media, that it's all to do with population growth. It's all to do with immigration. Obviously, that contributes to a housing crisis massively, especially when you've got all these pressures on housing that we have right now because of interest rates, because of where the market is. You're going to see these problems just exacerbated with immigration, but they're not the sole cause. And that's the thing that I want to highlight by showing you this chart. And really, this chart looks like the demise of a bubble, essentially, because this is the biggest decline that you've ever seen in the index in its entirety since its inception back in 1970. So you got 53 years of data, and you've never seen housing prices drop that fast, that quickly, and that steeply in Canada. So what does that tell you? It tells you you've just got to be very careful if you're out there in the housing market and what you're doing. There's an incredible amount of risk out there. There's an incredible amount of risk to the economy as well. So anyway, I want to thank you so much for watching this. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this video here. You might also like this playlist here. I will see you in the next one. Take care. Thank you for tuning in. It's an honor to be here and have you as a viewer.